My name is Andrew Watson. I'm the bid training consultancy manager here at Proactus. Been in post for about 6 years, and myself and the team here are living, breathing everything on a daily basis about helping our clients to put together the highest quality scoring bid responses they possibly can. And to that end, we're going to try and provide some guidance and some value around the topic of evaluation criteria across the course of the next little while today. So in terms of what we're planning to run over, these are the kind of key takeaway areas we're looking to kind of cover off. We're going to touch very briefly on how buyers score bids and award work, and just pick up on some of the language from the regulations that are there. We're going to look at the different aspects of evaluation criteria. We're going to pick up on what are the key considerations in this area. What should I be thinking about to ensure I'm doing things in the right way to maximize my scoring and my chances of success within sort of formal responses. We are going to look specifically around about the price evaluation criteria and how that can influence some decisions that we make within that process. And lastly, we're going to look at how to align our written responses indeed to evaluation criteria, again with the view to scoring as highly as possible within our submissions to give ourselves the best possible chance of winning the most work. So without further ado, we'll dive into it and get going. So the first area just to have a bit of a look at is around how buyers actually score bids and how they award work. So what we're doing is we're not assuming anyone's coming into this with a huge amount of knowledge. We're going to build up and really go through the fundamentals first, make sure it's clear for everyone. Getting into the more sort of detail and complexity towards the sort of middle and latter stages of the webinar. So in terms of public sector submissions, the buyers will always tell you how they are planning on scoring what you submit. That's unlike it can be in the private sector, where it's not always clear the mechanism that they're going to be using for arriving at a winning or multiple winner bids. Okay. In the public sector, it should always be explicit and clear what's the criteria that they're using to award the work. So like picking up on some of the regulatory language, a contracting authority may award a public contract to the supplier that submits the most advantageous tender in a competitive tendering procedure, which is what we're talking about, entering a competitive tendering procedure. Okay. The most advantageous tender, otherwise known as MAT, shortened to MAT, is the tender that the contracting authority considers satisfies the contracting authority's requirements and best satisfies the award criteria when assessed by reference to, etc., etc., etc. So the long and the short of it is they're going to lay out a criteria, and they are bound to choose who is awarded the work against the need for that to be the best satisfying of that award criteria. So if you best meet the award criteria, you should be awarded the work via the means of getting the highest possible marks. So far, hopefully, so clear in that regard. We are going on then, that's the fundamentals, to look at what are the different aspects of evaluation criteria, what do we need to be thinking about, and some bits and pieces within that. When we are submitting tenders, we are going to have instructions that the buyer has given us to make it clear how they're going to be assessing our response and the sequencing that that assessment takes place within. Okay. When we submit, we're always submitting information to support a decision about us in the selection stage. So what we'll see typically is that is going to be the information that is now held about us on the Central Digital Platform, CPD, and also the other parts of the sort of selection stage information that we've got to complete. Usually a selection questionnaire, but depending on where you are, etc., can be different terminology. That's the information that's captured about as an organization where we are just now and about what we have done in the past. It's not looking at the solution that we are proposing or how we're proposing to deliver the required goods or services to the supplier. In the selection stage, usually this is done as a pass-fail piece. So if there's any aspect of it that we fail, then we fail it in its entirety, and our response is not considered any further forward than that. Okay. If we pass the selection stage, if we meet the criteria that they've laid out to be a suitable supplier based on our current situation and what we've done in the past, then we move on to the tender stage where we're allowed to put forward responses um, about how we will deliver the solution that's needed, and that will be scored. Okay, there are exceptions to that, so there can be where you do the selection stage before in isolation from the tender stage, and that can be done as an assess stage where the buying authority is going to score that selection stage and only take through a certain number of suppliers. Again, it will be clear what kind of mode you're working in, but the standard way is that you will complete the information about the selection stage, i.e. your current and your previous, and the information about the tender stage, what you plan on doing at the same time, and that will get assessed in sequence, but you submit it all at the one point in time. If you get past the selection stage, if that's a pass and you've not failed against any of the mandatory criteria, then you're into the tender stage. The tender stage is obviously going to be constructed elements that in total add up to 100%, i.e. the overall assessment. Typically, there will be a quality component. There will be which may or may not contain a social value element. If it doesn't contain social value element, that will be a standalone component that's given its own percentage. And there will also be a pricing component, which again will be given its own percentage. In aggregate, the different components will add up to 100%. What I want to make clear at this stage is that the distribution of percentages across those different components is not fixed. If you've done more than one tender, you'll probably have seen that. It can change, and it can change quite drastically from, some scenarios where it's maybe 80% on quality, 20% on price, to the opposite of that, where 80% on price, 20% on quality. And of course, right from the get-go, we should be thinking about, well, that has material impact for me as a supplier across lots of different ways in terms of whether or not I pursue, how I pursue, etc., etc. Really important point I want to make at this stage is that we've talked about there the components adding up to 100%, but the values, the weightings of them can change. The mechanism for assessing those components can also change from tender to tender, okay? So the way in which price is going to be assessed could be different in one tender than it is in another. The way in which quality is going to be assessed could be different, or potentially almost certainly will be different in one um, tender to another. So we need to, at an early stage of any tender opportunity that we're considering, be really clear on what weighting is being given to the different components, what are the sub-weightings within those components, and what is the mechanism for scoring that's being applied to each of these different components. And we should have that really clear in our heads for any opportunity that we're pursuing. If we don't have those clear in our heads, we potentially need to go back and try again at that and make sure that we really do understand. There have been very rare occasions that I've seen where actually some aspect of the valuation criteria hasn't been properly laid out within the tender documentation, in which case we need to ask the authority for clarity. But that is the exception, and the vast majority of occasions, they really have laid out clearly what those different components are weighted at and what the mechanism for assessing them all is as well. Okay, hopefully that's all clear, folks. Let's move on and talk about some key considerations. So what's the kind of the mindset or the approach that we have to be having, the things that we've got to be thinking about to get us in a good place, a good frame of mind to be able to make best effect of the information that they've provided across the evaluation criteria. We'll move on to talk about that now. So just to add a little bit of more thinking around this, to like kind of just expand out a little bit our thinking. Look at this, the cable's getting in my way of my gesturing. The sacrifices, folks, the sacrifices. So why does it matter? Hopefully even the stuff that we've touched on now makes it really apparent why it does matter. It can have a big influence in terms of how they're going to assess it, and actually that should have a big bearing on all the decisions we make from the very early stage within our sort of bid cycle through to the very end stage. So when does it matter? I've just explained that there. In terms of whether or not we choose to pursue an opportunity, actually the evaluation criteria should have a clear impact. Everything else being the same, two different evaluation criterias could be the difference between whether we actually choose to pursue an opportunity or not. When we're talking about our solution design, so what is it that we're proposing? How are we proposing to solve the problems, to deliver the service or deliver the goods that the buyer is looking to procure? We have loads of decisions to make around what does our solution to doing that look like? How many people are involved? How many resources are involved? How quickly are we going to do it? What kind of support mechanisms are we going to have within that? All that type of stuff can have cost implications, okay? So we need to be really, really clear on what does the evaluation criteria look like? What is it talking about? What is it emphasizing? That should actually have a material impact on the solution that we design and put forward in terms of part of our actual strategy, our solution approach. In terms of what are we going to be emphasizing across our whole response, what are the strategic points that we want to be embedding within our response at various points? Well, actually, the evaluation criteria and the scoring within the evaluation criteria, again, can have a material impact on what we decide, what we think is important for our strategy. When we're looking at individual responses in an end-to-end, so they'll lay out the skeleton for our end-to-end responses, we need to be thinking about what do we want to be putting in them. And again, that can be influenced by what's included within the evaluation criteria. And then at an individual response level, again, we're looking at what does the evaluation criteria tell us? What are those individual aspects within the scoring matrix? How do we respond to those as best we can within our individual response creation, drafting, and editing? So all the way through from the pursuit decision through to the conclusion of our response, the evaluation criteria and the scoring, the scoring mechanism within each of the evaluation criteria should play a significant impact in how we determine to go through this process. Okay. Talked about the evaluation criteria, that kind of combination of price and quality. And obviously, if we've got 100% of the buying authority's got 100%, it's really obvious that if they're going to increase the weighting on one aspect, they're going to have to decrease it on another. So with the help of the new chat engines, I created this beautiful graph that's showing this in the most basic of terms. If you are going to be offering of a higher and higher quality, the chances are that's going to mean that to do that kind of viably, you're going to have to put your prices up. So as an organization, where do you sit within this on that line? Are you more towards the sort of higher quality, higher cost? Are you more towards the lower quality, lower cost? Or have you somehow shifted the paradigm and you're able to offer really high quality at really low costs? Again, if we think about that in relation to the evaluation criteria, it has a material impact on what we pursue and how we would choose to pursue it. Okay. So let's think about this in terms of some key considerations then. What does the criteria, as it's been laid out, tell us about the buyer's priorities? Have they set this up to be very heavily weighted on price? Have they set it up to be very heavily weighted on quality? Have they placed a lot of importance on the sort of social value aspects? How does this relate to where we sit and how we would position our offering in terms of as a default and in terms of the specifics of what we would do to respond to how they've set that out? Okay. Do we have any understanding as to why they've structured it as they have? Is it clear why they've gone, oh, like we've put a load of emphasis on why is it 80% price? Is it just a pricing exercise? Do they feel that it's basically commoditized, that the service, that the different supplier offerings are going to be commoditized, and really the difference that they care about is about how much they cost? Is that an actual reflection of what you can offer versus what others can offer? How well positioned are you to kind of compete within that space? Okay. Is there one of the other things we need to think about is what does the evaluation criteria tell us about the priorities of the buyer in relation to any other information that they might have included within the documentation? So are there inconsistencies where they're talking at length about social value? Are they talking at length about having absolute certainties around about the quality of the offering, but at the same time, they've put it as an 80% price evaluation? So is there some inconsistencies? Should that make us nervous about, again, how are they going to be actually evaluating it? What is really important to them, and where do we know, what sort of degree of certainty can we have about where we sit within this? The idea is that we need to align our offering in terms of what our offering actually looks like, the solution, and how we are talking about it and how we're positioning it within our response to make it the best fit it possibly can for what the buyer is looking for against the criteria that they've laid out. So we've been able to do that. I talk about bid quality. I talk about this in loads of the webinars. I talk about the quality of the bid being defined by it's the strength and the fit of our solution, and it's how well it's tailored and communicated to the buyer. So we need to do that through the lens of how are they going to be evaluating it, as well as what the requirements are, what they've said the specifications are, what else we might know about them. We need to look at it through that lens of what's the evaluation criteria. Is this a good fit, a strong and good fit solution against the evaluation criteria as it's been laid out? Have we tailored and communicated our solution very well against the evaluation criteria as it's been laid out? Does it align well to it in essence? Okay. At the early stages of our bid response, before we're getting into drafting, can we summarize if someone came up to us and said, can you tell me why you're bidding for this opportunity, why you think you might be successful for it, and can you tell me how the strategy for your pursuit of this bid aligns to the buyer's priorities and aligns to the evaluation criteria that they've laid out? So at the early stages of a bid, when you're in that kind of planning phase, but before you've started to actually draft, you should be able to say, yes, I can. We are going to pursue a strategy where we're adding in extra, we're putting extra items, extra features into the standard offering. We're building in extra aspects of our solution and extra reassurance because the evaluation criteria is heavily weighted towards quality. We will have to raise the prices that we're going to put in, but we feel that we'll win more marks against the heavily quality weighted evaluation criteria than we will lose against the pricing. We're pursuing this opportunity because we feel we can deliver a bigger gap in terms of the value that we're able to deliver versus our known competitors that we think will be competing in this space. In doing so, gather more marks in terms of the quality aspect than we will lose against the pricing one. We're going to be emphasizing this aspect of our delivery, our reassurance, our whatever it might be, our quality of services, our no interruptions, our response times that will cost us money to be able to do it, but we want to talk about response times consistently throughout our actual response. We want to talk about how responsive we are to their needs. We can do that. That's a really key part of our strategy. It's going to cost us a little bit to be able to legitimately do that in terms of our pricing. It's worthwhile overall. That's part of our overall approach. Obviously, I just made that up, which is why it didn't sound maybe that great, but it's that type of thinking. At the early stages, can you do that? Could you have that? Could you explain to someone if I asked you that question, 1 week into looking at a bid response, would you be able to come up with something hopefully a bit more articulate and coherent than I just did off the cuff? If you can't and you don't occupy that type of thinking, it's something to think about and really try and spend some time focusing on, because we should be able to do that. We need to have our strategy, our solution design, the things we want to emphasize across the bid should all be done with consideration of how the evaluation criteria is set out and what the weighting, what the mechanism for each of the different elements is within it. Okay. In terms of maximizing our score, are there trade-offs to consider here? That whole quality price piece that we've talked about, are there things that we can win marks in some sections that will mean we'll lose mark in others by taking certain decisions? When we're talking about our solution design, when we're talking about what we're going to do, there's costs involved in the different combinations of doing things. Are we building in that analysis to make sure what we're offering is commercially viable? We can get under, for example, if there's a price cap, can we viably deliver our solution as we've laid it out, as we want to include it within the submission? Can we do that within the price envelope that's been laid out? And that's not always an easy place to get to, or easy to determine if that's the case or not. We might have to do some quite detailed calculations to get there. Again, I'm laying this on a bit thick, folks, but bear with me because I think it's an important point, and it's again just getting us thinking. Are we thinking and articulating that and having these conversations internally at the early stages of a bid response to be sure we're doing the right thing? So in this made up scenario, but you know, there's loads of occasions I've worked with loads of organisations where this is an accurate representation. As a company, we're able to offer high quality solutions, delivering many tangible benefits to our customers, but we struggle to compete on price against many of our known competitors who are active in the marketplace. In scenario one, we're looking at responding to a bid where the quality is 70% of the overall evaluation. There's no cap on the overall contract value, and the pricing scoring mechanism is the standard way of awarding marks proportionate to the lowest price bidder. We can provide a high quality solution delivering benefits that our competitors will struggle to match. In that scenario, it's fairly clear that the evaluation criteria is quite well aligned to our offering. It's aligned to what our offering is, and everything else being equal, this could potentially be a really viable opportunity for us to pursue. In the second scenario, buyer scenario number two, the buyer has put an aggressively low total contract value cap on, i.e., if your submission on pricing is over £1 million, then you will be disqualified. Pricing is worth 70% of the overall score. The price scoring mechanism is heavily geared to penalise all but the lowest submissions. And in your individual scenario, this is linking up your organisation with the scenario, the bid you're looking to put in. So, and again, this won't be the case for every organization, but in this example, much of our costs are built in and we don't have the option to reduce aspects of our offering, i.e. redesign our solution to become more competitive on price. And I think I'm laboring the point, but hopefully everyone can see a distinct difference in terms of whether or not we would be likely to participate in buyer scenario one at more at one end of a spectrum and buyer scenario two more at another end of a spectrum. We are going to be, everything else be equal, much more likely to take part in that first scenario and much more likely to reject to take part in the second scenario. If in the second scenario it was very strategically important, we're going to have to get creative about, okay, well, what are the ways? Are there ways that we can viably pursue this within the cost envelope that's been laid out, the price envelope that's been laid out? What can we do? What ways are there to take out some of these costs that we thought were built in? Is this worth pursuing? Do we do this maybe as a break even, or even that it's not going to generate us any profits because it's strategically important, because there might be follow-ons that we can extract some value from down the line, etc., etc. But these are two relatively like either end of a spectrum type examples. The point being is each scenario we're looking at bidding for will sit somewhere along the spectrum, and we need to be really deliberate about understanding where that is, how suitable that is, whether we should be responding to it, and actually how we then go about doing that as well to best effect. So again, like I say, really kind of laboring the point using some simple examples there, but to make absolutely clear that this stuff has a material impact on how we should be doing it, what we should be doing, etc., etc. Okay, want to touch a little bit more on pricing evaluation. So obviously we've talked about there being a percentage of the overall assessment that's going to be based on the pricing. And I want to draw attention to the fact that different mechanisms can be used for pricing. There's not one set mechanism that authorities are obligated to use in any given occasion. The most standard mechanism that is used in terms of pricing evaluation is bids are scored proportionately to the lowest bid. Okay, so if you are so essentially if you're half as cheap as the cheapest bidder, then you're awarded half the marks. Okay, so it's proportionate without any cut-offs or anything like that. There are more geared approaches that can penalize, that can more penalize prices that aren't the cheapest. Okay, and there are lots of different variations on these, but again, it will all be laid out within an individual tender document. But don't get 3/4 of, and I know people that have done this, get 3/4 of the way through a bid submission to then realize that there's a heavily geared mechanism for the pricing that means it's very, very unlikely that they're going to be able to be successful with it. And they've only realized it because they just assumed it's a standard mechanism. It's not always going to be the standard mechanism, even though that is the most common. You get things like stepped penalties, which will be if you're within 10% of the lowest bid, you'll get whatever percentage of the marks. If you're within 10 to 20% of the lowest bid, you'll get a lower percentage of the marks. And then if you're above X percent, 30, 40%, whatever it might be, you'll actually be awarded 0 marks. So there's ones like that which are can be potentially very penalizing you for having too much of a gap with the cheapest bid. There's ones where if you're beyond a multiple of the cheapest bid, then you're 0. So for example, it could be capped at 2, and if you're twice as expensive as the cheapest bid, instead of getting half the available marks, you would get 0 available marks. Okay, so these type of mechanisms do exist. There's also ways for the pricing evaluation to be linked to the quality. So you get price per quality point is an aspect that's used occasionally. So you'll be awarded points for pricing based on your prices in proportion to the quality score that you've actually ascertained through the submission. Okay, so again, that's not a commonly used mechanism, but it is one that is available and is sometimes used by public sector authorities. Okay, let's get a bit real about pricing considerations for a little bit. I don't want to some of this stuff. I don't want to turn anyone's stomach. I don't want anyone to think. What I'm going to do is present some information about some of this stuff. It's up for you to make determinations about how and when you would use it, and whether or not you think other competitors in your space, how they're using this information as well. The long and the short of it is that if you're adhering to the rules around pricing, there are different ways in which you can complete your pricing in a way that you think might be revenue neutral to you, that will give you different scores within the submission. And I'll give you some examples of what that means. Let me take a step back for a minute. And again, you might think, well, am I really going to get into the realm of like gamifying my pricing? If you're not, then it could be that there's other suppliers that are willing to do that. Okay, so I'm going to present the evidence, and it's up to you to sort of present the information. It's up to you to take away and decide how you want to sort of run with it from there. In terms of pricing consideration, obviously we should be looking at our previous results. Our previous results have given us information about where we stood in terms of our pricing scores. Okay, so when we submitted previous, we extrapolate from that, say, okay, well, what score did we get? What score did the winning we know what the winning score was, therefore we can work out what their pricing was based on the mechanism that was in play for that occasion. Okay, so we can work out how competitive we are in actual terms on previous submissions and go, okay, where do we think we need to get to in any given scenario to be more competitive on price? Obviously, you're dealing with imperfect information. The other point we're always got to consider around pricing is, with the solution that we are proposing, have we properly, accommodated or accounted for all of the costs we're going to incur to deliver that solution, to make sure that what we are proposing in terms of our pricing is commercially viable. How commercially viable? How much margin are we happy to have? Do we need to make on this? How viable is it that we make that margin against this type of submission? Okay. Again, let's make sure we're making strategic decisions around this. In terms of the kind of the different ways in which let's call it that, the different ways in which you can complete pricing, we need to understand that there's more scope for doing things strategically or looking at things differently if you are completing different prices that then a spreadsheet that the buyer has provided then aggregates and puts them into one overall price. There's potential options for how we complete it in that scenario. The other scenario being if there are separate aspects to pricing that are only combined afterwards. So for example, what you put in for this aspect of pricing might be worth 5%, and this aspect of pricing might be worth 20%. Okay. If you're in either of those scenarios, and then your overall score for pricing, they get added together. If you're in either of those scenarios, there are opportunities to think strategically about how you're going to complete the pricing. If you have to complete lots and lots of different pricing lines, that then a spreadsheet that the buyer has provided adds up into a total. Or how are those weighted? How are the different components weighted? Are they just all added together? Are they put through weightings of importance? Are they put through multipliers? How much of a bearing do the different aspects, how much are they likely to have in terms of what's likely to be called off or used, for example, within the contract? If you're committing to 100 different prices to say you'll honor those within the contract, are all of those 100 different lines equally likely to be used to the same quantity? I hope hopefully it's pretty obvious where I'm going with this. What some of your competitors will be doing, if you're not, is they'll be making strategic decisions about adjusting from their standard from a kind of revenue neutral way of completing that. They might go, well, I can put a bit on this one and take a bit off this one because I think that one's going to more likely come into it, so I can put a bit more on that one, but I can take disproportionately more of this one because I think we'll hardly ever get that one requested, etc., etc., to get to a point where we've got a lower overall price. Therefore, we're going to score more highly on it, but in a way that we think will return us the same revenues across the actual contract execution. We can do some what if analysis around that sort of stuff to see what are the different ways in which we can configure it to come up with different overall prices, different overall levels of kind of margin, different overall levels of risk. Can get into the weeds a little bit with this stuff, but just be aware if you're not thinking about it on these type of terms, then some of your competitors will be. The other aspect is what if there are, as I talked about, different components that contribute to the overall pricing. So say, for example, you've got a situation where a price for after sale service is worth 10% of the overall contract value, and a price for the sale of the goods themselves is worth 20% of the overall assessment. What will happen is your score for the 10% weighted section and your score for the 20% weighted section will get added together. So the maximum percentage available is 30%. You could, as an example, and I've actually seen this being successfully done, it's risky dependent on how the buyer views it, but you could say our price for after sales service is going to be 0, and we are going to add on what we think it will cost us to put this as 0. We're going to add that on to our sales price. So what that would mean is we're going to lose marks against the 20% evaluated pricing aspect. Maybe I'm going to lose, let's say my score for that is 16 out of 20 as opposed to being equally cheapest. I've lost 4 or 5 marks. But in the after sales part, I've put it as 0. I'm going to get a score of 10. I'm going to get all 10% of the marks. and because no one else can be a proportion of 0, everyone else is going to get 0 in that one. Now, I've seen that being done. That is a little bit uncomfortable, maybe a little bit risky, but I've seen it done where their overall revenue profile from the contract was the same, but they did it in a way that they net gained maybe 5 or 6 marks overall versus their competitors by doing it. 5 or 6 marks out of 100 is a very, very big uplift. It's things like that. If you're not considering these type of things, other people might be, okay? So again, run through some what if scenarios. If you're not superly the financial whizzes within your organization, involve the finance guys and get them to do some what if analysis against this type of stuff, okay, folks? Maybe everyone's not feeling super comfortable that kind of stuff, but you know, this is the reality. It is happening in the world, okay? Hopefully everyone's not too icked out by that and is happy to carry on. Okay, I've not had any disgusted comments, so I'm laying it out like it is, guys, and it's for you to make the strategic decisions about how you want to respond in your bids, but be aware that this is how, especially some of the larger companies, dare I say, the ones with more mature bid functions, they're looking at that through they're looking at this stuff through that lens. Okay. Last section, I want to talk a bit about aligning your written responses to evaluation criteria. So I'm talking about specifically against your written responses, there's going to be a scoring matrix, and that's going to have different criteria, different ways or requirements to score in different categories. I'm going to spin on to a slide that's got examples of them in a minute, but we have to be thinking in terms of at an early stage when we're looking at our end-to-end answer planning, what are the things we want to be emphasizing across all our responses or across as many responses as we can that are going to align to the top scoring criteria within the scoring matrix that they've provided. Okay, so they've identified, they've put some priorities. The scoring is giving us access to what they think are their priorities in terms of how have they weighted the quality responses, and then what have they said is required to get a top score against an individual quality response. So we need to be thinking about that at the stage of planning out and going, I want to include this in this answer. These are the type of things I want to be emphasizing across my whole response. Okay. What are and against the scoring matrix that they've provided, what are the differences between the categories in terms of scoring? What does the one have that the next one has? Okay, we need to consider, plan, and draft our responses according to the scoring system that they've laid out against the quality questions. If we write our responses out and then we look at them against our scoring matrix, we're doing it the wrong way around. We need to go, I'm not going to start writing my response until I understand and I'm clear on what is required of my answer to score a 5, whatever it might be, a 5 or a 10, whatever the scoring criteria in the matrix is. I actually need to plan my answer out to say, okay, I'm going to plan my answer to spend enough time to hit the points that are required for me for it to be really, really clear that I deserve to get that 5 or that 10 or whatever it is within the scoring matrix. We are always, always, always needing to try and align our planning and then our drafting of our answers to the highest scoring level within the scoring matrix that they've provided. If we're aligning it to anything else, or we're not aligning it to anything at all, we're going to make mistakes and we're going to leave marks on the table. We need to always signpost that our answer deserves to sit squarely in the highest scoring criteria against that scoring matrix. And we need to make sure that when we review our responses, we do likewise, and we make sure we're acting as a guide. The scoring matrix levels are acting as a guide when we review our work. We need to be as harsh as possible to say, does this response truly sit within this category? Let me give you a couple of examples up on the screen. Hopefully these are big enough to be seen. If I look at the one on the right hand side of the screen, it's 0 to 5, so there's 6 different levels with scores against them. If I want my quality response to score as a 5, very comprehensive and supported by a very high standard of evidence, gives the commissioner very high level of confidence, in the bidder to deliver the contract, exceeds the commissioner's requirements in most respects, versus the criteria on the left, outstanding. The response to the questions gives a high confidence of the tender's ability to satisfy the requirements. So if I'm faced with the one on the left versus the one on the right, there should be a difference in terms of how I think about constructing my response. The one on the left, I need to think about what can I do to provide confidence, and I need to think about making sure I'm clear on what all the requirements are, and provide extra evidence and whatever I need to reassurance that we're able to deliver those requirements. The one on the right, I need to have a very high standard of evidence, that's clear, and I also need to, distinct from the other scoring matrix, I need to be emphasizing that I exceed these requirements in most respects. So I've talked about this before in training and in webinars. If it asks me to exceed the requirements in most respects, I need to frame that. I need to say these are the requirements that I think are relevant for this response. These are the ones that we meet. These are all the ones that we exceed. Therefore, I'm exceeding most of them. Therefore, I deserve to be in that category. You're never going to write, by the way, I deserve to be in this category, score me a 5 or score me a 10. But you need to be explicit that you've understood the requirements, and you need to be explicit that against most of them, you are exceeding them. Okay? If you don't do that, then how can they know whether or not you are meeting them versus exceeding them? Okay? So someone's asked a question. Can you show us a really good tender response? This is a difficult one. I don't have one to show you here, but I'll maybe try and put something together for the next webinar, like a short form, really good response that we can maybe share. So bear with me on that one. I'll try and put something together, but it's a good question. But hopefully it's clear that I would then look to do something a little bit different with that one. I have to structure the answer differently. I have to write the actual answer differently than I would with the one on the left. I don't need in the one on the left to talk about exceeding most of the requirements. I do in the one from the right. There might be different aspects within the scoring that talk about added value. There might be things that talk about innovation as requirements to score in the top scoring category. If I've got a requirement, if I've got within the scoring matrix talking about innovation, then if I don't talk about innovation, how am I going to get into that top scoring category? So I need to refer to the aspects of my solution appropriate to that answer through the lens of this is innovative, this is innovation, this is innovative delivering you value, etc., etc. If I don't do that, I'm not signposting that I deserve to be in that category. Okay, so I have to think about what's the criteria and making really significant responses to it in terms of answer planning, strategy points to build into my response, individual answer planning, individual drafting, individual answer review. It's that significant, okay? This is when we're going into these answers are okay, quite good, mediocre, into if you want to hit top marks, you cannot do it without this really detailed focus on evaluation criteria. Okay, it's just impossible. Okay. That, folks, is a little bit longer than I wanted to last. We're going to have a Q&A follow-on webinar in the early part of November. Do sign up for it for the Tenders Direct members on. You can see it through your portal. Go onto our website, guys. If you're not Tenders Direct members, you can search for webinars on Tenders Direct, and you'll be able to sign up for the webinar. There's already loads of folks signed up for it. We're going to ask you questions as part of a registration process. We're going to run through some live examples, and responding to the live question there, we're going to try and maybe put together a really good quality response as well, so you can see an example of what that looks like in a little bit of a vacuum as well. If there's things you want to discuss in a little bit more detail or how this might apply to your organization, we're really happy to carry on the conversation. bidsupport@tendersdirect.co.uk is the email to reach us on, or if anyone wants to give us a shout on that phone number that's there as well, you're very welcome to. Apologise once again, sorry for the hiccup relating to the sound in the very early part of the webinar. Thank you so much everyone for sticking with us, for the contributions, and hopefully you're able to take away a lot of value from the stuff that we've talked over. We will see you at the next webinar in November, hopefully, with some questions and some time to run through that stuff there. For now, I really appreciate everyone sticking around, appreciating all the emojis and the positive messages about the webinar as well. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we will hope to see you at the next one. Thank you again, folks, and yeah, catch you again soon. Bye for now.